Hold on, what if I told you that Skinwalker Ranch Season 7, Episode 12 contains a discovery that could completely change the way we look at every experiment the team has conducted this season? Because one moment in this episode left the investigators questioning everything. They thought they understood. This wasn't just another strange reading. It wasn't just another unexplained signal. It was the kind of result that forces everyone to stop and ask one terrifying question. What if the ranch isn't simply reacting to the team's experiments? What if it's reacting to the people conducting them? Think about that for a second. If that's true, then every previous investigation may have been missing the biggest piece of the puzzle. And here's the most surprising part. The biggest clue isn't hidden in the dramatic moments. It's buried in a detail that almost everyone watching could easily overlook. So, stay with me, because by the end of this breakdown, you'll see Episode 12 in a completely different way. Welcome back. Today we're breaking down Skinwalker Ranch Season 7, Episode 12, uncovering the most important discoveries, analyzing the hidden clues, and separating what the evidence actually shows from the theories surrounding it. But before we begin, I have one question for you. Do you think the team is finally getting closer to an answer? Or is every new discovery simply revealing a much bigger mystery? Let's dive in. Don't skip this video, because what happened in Skinwalker Ranch Season 7, Episode 12 may be one of the most talked about investigations the team has ever recorded. At first, it looks like another routine experiment. The equipment is ready. The team knows exactly what they're planning to test. Everything seems normal. But within moments, something unexpected begins happening. Not something anyone confidently predicted. Not something the investigators can immediately explain. And that's exactly why this episode feels different. Because instead of getting closer to a clear answer, every new observation seems to raise an even bigger question. What if every strange event the team has documented this season isn't random? What if all those unusual readings, the unexpected equipment behavior, the recurring locations, and the repeated experiments have been pointing toward one hidden pattern all along? If that's true, then Episode 12 isn't just another investigation. It could be the episode that changes how the entire season is interpreted. So stay with me until the end. Because there's one detail almost everyone overlooks on their first watch. And it might be the key to understanding why this investigation stands out. The episode begins with the team returning to the ranch carrying more confidence than ever before. Months of experiments have provided an enormous amount of information. Some results have been repeatable, others remain difficult to explain. But instead of chasing dramatic conclusions, the investigators focus on one thing: evidence. Every experiment starts with a question. Can previous observations be repeated? Do similar conditions produce similar results? Is there a measurable pattern hiding behind what appears to be random? Those questions shape everything that follows. As preparations begin, the team reviews earlier findings and discusses how today's investigation builds on previous work. Rather than treating each experiment as completely separate, they begin connecting observations from different locations and different days. That careful approach makes this investigation feel much more significant, because scientific progress rarely comes from one dramatic moment. It comes from patiently comparing results until a pattern begins to emerge. And that's exactly what the team hopes to find. But what happens next makes everyone pay even closer attention. As the investigation moves forward, the atmosphere begins to change. The confidence everyone had at the start slowly turns into curiosity. Every member of the team is watching the equipment more carefully than before, because after everything they've experienced throughout the season, they know that even the smallest change could become the biggest clue. One reading by itself doesn't tell the whole story. That's why the team immediately begins comparing the latest results with data collected during previous investigations. And that's where things become really interesting. Instead of looking at today's experiment in isolation, they start asking whether similar conditions have appeared before. Have they seen this type of reading at this location? Did another experiment produce a similar pattern? Is there something connecting events that seemed completely unrelated at the time? Those questions become the real focus of episode 12. One of the biggest strengths of the investigation is that the team doesn't rush toward dramatic conclusions. Whenever an unexpected result appears, the first response is always the same. Check the equipment. Verify the measurements. Compare the data, repeat the test if possible. That careful process is exactly what keeps the investigation grounded, because unusual observations become much more meaningful when they can be examined carefully rather than simply accepted at face value. As more information is collected, the discussion among the researchers becomes even more important. Different specialists begin offering different interpretations of the same evidence. Some suggest that environmental conditions might explain part of the results. Others believe the pattern deserves much deeper investigation before any conclusions can be reached. And that's what makes this episode so engaging. It isn't just about what the instruments detect. It's about how the team works together to understand those observations. Then another detail begins, attracting everyone's attention. The timing. Throughout the season, certain unusual events have seemed to occur under specific conditions, whether that's meaningful or simply coincidence is exactly what the investigators are trying to determine. If similar patterns continue appearing, the team may have discovered something worth exploring in future experiments. And suddenly, what looked like a routine investigation starts feeling much bigger, not because anyone has all the answers, but because every new piece of information raises another question that demands to be explored. At this point, even the viewers begin asking the same thing. Are these observations finally revealing a consistent pattern, or are they simply reminding us how much about the ranch remains unexplained? And just when it feels like the investigation has reached its most important moment, the episode introduces another development that shifts everyone's attention once again. That's where the story takes another unexpected turn. The unexpected turn doesn't arrive with a dramatic announcement. It doesn't arrive with flashing lights or a shocking revelation. Instead, it begins with something much more dangerous. A question. A simple question that nobody on the team can answer immediately. And sometimes those are the questions that matter most. Because throughout the history of Skinwalker Ranch, the biggest mysteries haven't appeared when investigators expected them. They've appeared when the evidence refuses to fit existing explanations. As the team continues analyzing the latest results, attention shifts away from individual measurements and toward the larger picture. That's when the possibility of a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Think about everything the team has documented this season. Unusual signals, unexpected equipment behavior, strange measurements appearing in specific areas. Experiments producing results that seem connected despite being conducted weeks apart. Individually, each observation raises curiosity. Together, they raise something much bigger. The possibility that multiple events may be connected by a factor researchers still haven't identified. And that idea changes everything, because if a hidden variable exists, then previous investigations might need to be re-examined from an entirely different perspective. Suddenly, observations that once seemed unrelated start appearing much more significant. The team begins reviewing earlier findings, comparing locations, comparing conditions, comparing timelines, searching for anything that might connect the dots. And the more they look, the more intriguing the mystery becomes. One investigator points out similarities between separate events. Another notices details that didn't seem important at the time. A third suggests that certain assumptions may need to be reconsidered. None of these observations provide a final answer, but together they create something equally valuable: a new direction, a new possibility, a new avenue of investigation. And that's exactly what keeps everyone engaged, because mysteries become most compelling when they begin producing more questions than answers. At this stage of the episode, something fascinating starts happening. The conversation itself becomes part of the investigation. Viewers aren't simply watching experiments, they're watching researchers think through a problem in real time. They're watching experts challenge their own assumptions. They're watching people follow evidence wherever it leads, even when that path remains uncertain. And that's where episode 12 becomes more than a typical investigation. It becomes a story about curiosity, about persistence, about the willingness to continue searching even when definitive answers remain out of reach. But then another unexpected development appears, a development that immediately changes the atmosphere. The team notices something about the timing of several observations. Not one observation. Several. Events that occurred during different investigations suddenly appear less random than they first seemed. Nobody claims they've solved the mystery. Far from it, but the possibility alone is enough to create excitement, because if timing plays a larger role than previously understood, then future experiments could be designed differently. Questions could be tested more precisely. Patterns could be examined more carefully, and entirely new discoveries could emerge. The implications are enormous. For a moment, the investigation feels as though it's standing on the edge of a breakthrough, not a complete solution, not a final answer, but perhaps a step closer to understanding why certain events continue attracting attention, yet that's also where the suspense grows strongest. Because every time the team believes they're approaching clarity, another layer of complexity appears. Another variable, another anomaly, another unanswered question. It's almost as if the ranch continuously challenges every attempt to simplify the mystery. And perhaps that's why the investigation remains so captivating after all these years. The goal isn't simply to prove or disprove one theory. The goal is to understand a collection of observations that continue resisting easy explanations. As daylight begins fading and the investigation enters its next phase, the tension becomes even more noticeable. Everyone understands the importance of gathering as much information as possible. Every reading matters, every observation matters, every detail matters, because nobody knows which piece of information could become significant later. A note that seems unimportant today might become critical tomorrow. A measurement ignored during one experiment might become essential during the next. That's why documentation remains such an important part of the process. The team isn't merely looking for dramatic moments, they're building a record that allows future investigations to compare results and search for repeating patterns. And speaking of patterns, one of the most intriguing discussions in the episode revolves around exactly that idea. How many unusual observations must occur before coincidence becomes an insufficient explanation? It's a difficult question. Scientists ask similar questions in every field. A single event may be random. Two events may still be random. But as observations continue accumulating, researchers naturally begin looking for underlying causes. That's exactly what happens here. Not because anyone wants a particular answer, but because that's how investigation works. You follow the evidence, you test ideas, you eliminate possibilities, and then you test again. The episode does an excellent job showing this process. Instead of presenting mystery as something magical or impossible, it presents mystery as something worthy of careful study. Something that demands patience, something that rewards persistence, something that requires humility. Because the moment investigators assume they already know the answer is often the moment they stop asking the right questions. And episode 12 repeatedly reminds viewers of that lesson. Stay curious, stay cautious. Keep investigating. As the team prepares for the next stage of testing, anticipation reaches its highest point so far. The earlier observations are still fresh in everyone's minds. The discussions are still ongoing. The possibilities are still being debated. And now another opportunity to gather evidence is about to begin. But here's the question that hangs over the entire episode. What if the most important discovery isn't the one everyone is looking for? What if the real breakthrough is hiding somewhere nobody thought to examine? Because history is filled with discoveries that happened by accident. Patterns noticed unexpectedly, connections recognized at the last moment. Questions nobody realized they should be asking. And episode 12 creates the feeling that the investigation may be approaching exactly that kind of moment. A moment where one small detail suddenly changes the entire conversation. A moment where months of data begin forming a clearer picture. A moment where the team realizes they've been looking at the mystery from the wrong angle all along. Whether that moment arrives or not remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. By the time the investigation reaches its next major stage, the stakes feel higher than ever, and the mystery feels deeper than ever, which is exactly why viewers won't want to look away. As the investigation enters its most critical phase, something begins to feel different, not because anyone announces a breakthrough, not because alarms suddenly start going off, but because the team realizes they're asking completely different questions than they were asking at the beginning of the season. In earlier investigations, the goal was simple: document the unusual, record every observation, repeat every experiment. But now, the focus has changed. Instead of asking, "What just happened?" the team is asking, "Why does it keep happening here?" That small shift changes everything. Because once you begin searching for causes instead of simply recording events, every piece of evidence becomes more valuable. As another experiment gets underway, every investigator is watching closely. Nobody wants to miss a single detail. Every camera is recording. Every instrument is collecting data. Every observation is documented carefully. The atmosphere is completely silent. Even the smallest sound seems important. Everyone knows that whatever happens next could either support months of research or force them back to the beginning. That's the reality of scientific investigation. Sometimes years of work produce one important clue. Sometimes one experiment raises 20 new questions. Either way, progress depends on following the evidence. Then something catches the team's attention. At first, it doesn't seem dramatic. One investigator notices a small inconsistency, another checks the equipment, a third compares the information with earlier recordings. For several moments, nobody says very much. They're thinking, comparing, trying to understand whether they're looking at something meaningful or something completely ordinary. Those quiet moments create some of the strongest tension in the entire episode, because the audience begins asking the same question. Did they just discover something important, or are they simply being extra cautious? And honestly, that's exactly what makes Skinwalker Ranch different from many other mystery shows. It isn't only about unusual events, it's about the investigation itself. Watching experienced researchers work through uncertainty, watching them challenge their own assumptions, watching them admit when they don't yet have enough evidence, that honesty makes every genuine discovery feel much more significant. As the discussion continues, several possibilities are considered. Could environmental conditions explain the readings? Could nearby equipment have influenced the measurements? Could there be another variable the team hasn't identified yet? Every explanation is considered. None are accepted without evidence. That's how good investigations move forward. By testing possibilities instead of defending conclusions. Then Brandon asks a question that immediately changes the conversation. Instead of focusing on today's results, he asks everyone to think about the entire season. What if today's observations aren't important because they're unusual? What if they're important because they match something already recorded months earlier? The room becomes quiet, because everyone realizes exactly what that would mean if similar patterns continue appearing across different investigations. The mystery becomes much harder to dismiss as coincidence. Immediately, the team begins reviewing previous records. Old experiment logs. Earlier measurements. Locations where unusual observations were documented. The process takes time. Nobody rushes. Accuracy matters more than speed, and while they're reviewing everything, another interesting discussion begins. One investigator points out that some of the most overlooked information isn't the dramatic footage. It's the background data. Weather conditions. Time of day. Equipment placement, environmental measurements. Details most viewers barely notice. Could those overlooked details actually hold the key? It's an intriguing possibility, because history has shown that breakthroughs often come from information people originally believed wasn't important. That idea changes how everyone starts looking at the investigation. Instead of searching only for dramatic moments, they begin appreciating the ordinary ones, because ordinary observations often reveal extraordinary patterns. As evening approaches, the atmosphere across the ranch feels increasingly tense. Everyone senses they're getting closer to something, not necessarily a final answer, but perhaps a better question. And sometimes, a better question is even more valuable. Because the quality of an investigation depends on the quality of the questions being asked. The team understands this. That's why nobody declares victory. Nobody claims the mystery has been solved. Instead, they keep collecting information, keep comparing evidence, keep looking for consistency. That patience is one of the biggest strengths of the entire investigation. Then another discussion begins. What happens if future experiments reproduce today's observations? That possibility excites everyone because repeatable results are far more valuable than one-time events. Repeatability allows researchers to investigate more carefully, to adjust experiments, to test competing explanations, to gradually narrow the possibilities, and that's exactly where episode 12 leaves us emotionally. Standing between curiosity and uncertainty. The evidence has become more interesting, the questions have become more focused. But the mystery remains very much alive, and perhaps that's the biggest takeaway from this entire investigation. The ranch isn't becoming less mysterious. The investigation is becoming more sophisticated. Every experiment builds on the last. Every discovery improves the next question. Every unanswered mystery pushes the team to investigate even further. And just when it feels like the episode is beginning to reveal its biggest secret. One final development changes the direction of the investigation yet again. A development that could become the foundation for everything the team explores next. Because sometimes the most important discovery isn't the answer you've been searching for. It's the new mystery you never expected to find.